Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Tucker, CEO at the Churchill Club, and tonight's program is called Steve Jobs, A Legacy of Vision and Leadership. We're fortunate indeed to have with us an amazing group of people who, on stage here, who knew Steve Jobs well, and many in the audience also. Our on-stage participants are Bill Atkinson, Jean-Louise Gassée, Andy Hertzfeld, Regis McKenna, Deb Stapleton, Larry Tesler, and of course, our moderator, Paul Freiberger. Thank you all for your presence. We have asked our speakers to tell stories and share insights that not only will inspire us tonight in the room, but also through the recordings, hopefully many others for generations to come. Last week, we held a Churchill Club salon with Sir David Wallace, master of Churchill College, which is a college in Cambridge University that was started by Winston Churchill. And as Sir David described Churchill, we were struck by the similarities with Steve Jobs. He said Churchill wasn't a saint. He could be extremely difficult to work with. He followed his generals around and got into the details of what they were doing, which made their lives very difficult. But when they stood up to him and argued with him, he listened. He did not graduate from college, and his role in history was singular. Do you see or hear any similarities? Tonight we have 3 students with us from Homestead High School, which is Steve Jobs' alma mater. Stephen Shu, Brian Peng, Ayush Mehra. Now these young people participate in the Future Business Leaders of America program. The Homestead High chapter has been state champion for the past 13 years. And I wanted you 3 to know that Jobs attended lectures at Hewlett-Packard after school. So this is a very good place for you to be tonight. 3 people stepped forward to help underwrite this event, and they are Scott Yara of Green Plum, Mike Markula of the Markula Foundation, and Godfrey Sullivan of Splunk, and we could not have done this without you. Thank you. And I also want to thank the Tech Museum for co-hosting this event. We are 2 nonprofits with complementary missions. The Churchill Club is all about encouraging innovation and economic growth, and the Tech inspires the innovator in everyone, and we humbly appreciate your support for our work. As usual, thank you. As usual, many people came together to help bring this program into being. Without the help and encouragement of one specific individual, we would not be here tonight, and that person is Chris Espinosa. Thank you, Chris. Our next program will be presented tomorrow night, called Business in China 2012. Speakers include the chief architect of Alibaba and the chairman of Silicon Valley Bank and others. And if you would like to attend, we would be happy to have you join us as our guest. To RSVP, just stop by the registration table on the way out or write to info@churchillclub.org by tomorrow morning. And my last announcement, if you are tweeting, please use hashtag Churchill Club, and other Twitter codes appear in your printed programs. Our moderator, Paul Freiberger, began his career as a journalist producing stories for the NPR programs All Things Considered and Morning Edition. Paul wrote about Silicon Valley during the early years of the personal computer revolution, and he wrote a famous book called Fire in the Valley, which was made into a movie called Pirates of Silicon Valley. And while Steve Jobs purportedly did not like the movie, he did love Paul's book. He once told Paul that it made him cry when he read it to remember the early days. Please give your warmest welcome to Paul Freiberger.
Thank you. Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm used to keyboards, not so much microphones, so it's great to be here. I can assure you that we have an amazing panel of folks here. I spent many years reporting on Silicon Valley, most of those years writing about Apple and other companies as well, I often would rely on experts about the technology and business in order to really understand what was going on before I'd sit down and actually write a story. I would call some sources, call experts, and all of these people here in front of you were among the most smart and helpful folks that I knew at the time in the many years that I covered Silicon Valley. So we're really lucky to think about Steve's legacy with these people here. The notion of legacy is a wonderful topic, I think, for this evening to orient a discussion about Steve and our memories. But legacy is kind of a loaded term. What kind of legacy did Steve have? Well, he was certainly a super entrepreneur, but he didn't set out, or it wasn't his mission to create a legacy for himself. That was not his driving goal, I don't think. He wasn't Donald Trump. He created a legacy.
Better haircut.
Better haircut.
He created a legacy just by doing, in fact, what he did, and often collaborating with all of these people here before you. They all worked with Steve. I didn't work with Steve, but nevertheless, I was fortunate to enjoy his charm and his anger. In fact, the one story, perhaps one anecdote I'll tell, I'll start it off right away, that the very first conversation that I ever had with Steve Jobs, I was a founding editor at a publication called InfoWorld some years back, and our job there was to report on the developments of these startup microcomputer companies and software companies. And I came across, or I developed a story that we were about to publish, discussing several new computers that Apple was developing, the Lisa, the Macintosh, and another. And I called the public relations vice president at Apple, and he was polite, but asked me to hold off a moment. And then my phone rang 5 minutes later, and I picked it up, and Steve introduced himself. And he started hollering at me and telling me that I was going to take the company down, and so that was my introduction to Steve. But about a month later, he called and invited me down to lunch, and from that day forward, things were a lot more cordial. Anyway, these folks here will have a lot more to say about Steve's legacy, and so why don't we begin just by having each person spend a minute to introduce himself or herself, and then we'll continue a conversation.
My name is Bill Atkinson. I came to Apple in 1978, and I got to work with Steve a lot, and I get to write QuickDraw, MacPaint, and HyperCard. I'm a nature photographer now, and now I'm trying to rescue the postcard tradition.
My name is Jean-Louise Gassée. I joined Apple on the day of the IPO, December 12, 1980. And I started Apple France, and then I moved to Cupertino to take over product development in '85 in interesting times, shall we say. I lasted 5 years in that role. And one night I had dinner with John Sculley, and he asked me what I thought of him, and I told him. So I got fired, which was very helpful. You know, John Sculley is my benefactor. He hired me, he gave me several promotions, and then the physical and the financial push to become an entrepreneur. So I mean is that really, I'm not being polite at this time. And then I became an entrepreneur for 10 years, and then now I'm a venture capitalist. So that's my third career, and I enjoy it very much. I think the Valley is more interesting to yours truly than when I joined Hewlett-Packard in 1968 in France. These are very exciting times, so I'm thrilled to be here.
My name's Andy Hertzfeld. I was a 24-year-old grad student at UC Berkeley in 1978 when I bought my Apple II, and it drew me to Apple like a moth to a flame. I just completely fell in love with it. I worked with Bill and others on writing the original Macintosh system software. Left Apple shortly after the Mac was released in 1984. Since then, I've co-founded 3 companies, including General Magic with Bill. And for the last 6 years, I've been working at Google.
It's been 6 years?
Yeah.
Wow. Time flies.
I'm Regis McKenna. I moved to California from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was at that time the steel capital of the world, moving here to the middle of what was not yet Silicon Valley. Which was quite a transition. I opened a sales office for a technical publisher. Didn't particularly care for that business, and I joined a semiconductor startup down in Santa Clara called General Microelectronics that was making MOS devices. And then they were acquired, and I walked across the street and was, I think, the 3rd person in marketing at National Semiconductor. I started my firm in 1970, and one of our early clients in 1971 was Intel. So we launched most of their processor products, and they're the first RAM memories out of National, and some other products that they had made. Working with Steve was nothing like working for Andy Grove, let me tell you. Or before that, Charlie Spork. In any event, Intel apparently, Steve was looking for someone, some agency to do his work, and called Intel, and he referenced us. And I met Steve in 1976, and my firm, I had my firm for 30 years, and now I do seed investments and travel.
For you. I'm Deborah Stapleton. I started my firm in 1992, a little after Regis had paved the way, and my firm does investor relations and public relations. So Steve hired us in 1995, in January that year, to begin to prepare the ground for an IPO, which he knew he wanted to do within 12 months or so. In fact, he did it in November of that same year. So we plotted and planned how we would roll out the company and explain to people what a computer-animated movie might be. I mean, it's hard to realize now, but no one had a clue what we were talking about. I would go around to Wall Street analysts or to reporters with little bits of Toy Story on my then huge laptop computer and try to show them little bits of it so they could have an idea what a computer-animated movie could be. So it was great fun, and worked with them a great deal through several movies, and had a great time.
I'm Larry, excuse me, Larry Tesler. I've been in the industry about 50 years, and in the 70s, I was at Xerox PARC, which we'll probably talk about a little bit today. And towards the end of my time there, late 79, I was giving a demo to Apple Computer for reasons we'll probably also talk about a little bit later. And that's how I got to know the company better than I had before. I was aware of them, but that got me thinking about maybe I'd rather be at a company really getting this technology out there. So I joined Apple, and I was there for 17 years. And so I was there for 5 years with Steve there, and then at the end, we overlapped a little bit. But I wanted to go off into the internet world and did that. And currently, I'm a consultant.
I think that Steve had a good eye for talent. That may be part of his legacy. He hired people that were not always in the mainstream of what you would expect at a computer company. I know of at least 2 people whom he hired who were planning to become medical doctors. I think Bill was one of them, so I thought I'd ask Bill to tell us how Steve convinced him to drop out.
Okay. I was a graduate student in neuroscience up at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I got, and a friend of mine, Jeff Raskin, that I knew from my undergraduate down at UC San Diego, wrote me and said, you know, something really cool is starting up down here. Why don't you come and check it out? And I said, no, I've got to finish my PhD or I'll never get to do research. You know, I'll be working in somebody else's lab instead of other people working in my lab on my good ideas. And so then one day, round-trip airfare showed up, non-refundable tickets. He said, just come and visit for a weekend. What do you have to lose? Okay, so I flew down, and that day, Steve Jobs, that was his main mission, was to court me and get me to come down there. I think Jeff had sufficiently convinced him ahead of time that I was worth getting, and I remember showing some of my credentials to Steve, and he didn't even want to look at them. You know, wasn't interested in, you know, the work that I had done. He just looked at me and he talked to me, and after not very long, he judged that I would be an asset. And so he said, well, you know, so he brought me around to meet all the people at Apple. There were 30 people there, and I found them to be passionate and intelligent and having fun, and so that was interesting, but that wouldn't have got me there. What he did at the end of the day is he said, you know, up in Seattle, where you're reading about hot new technology coming out, you know, in electronic design, those technologies actually happened or were invented 2 or 3 years before that. There's a lag time between the time something is invented and the time it's available to the public. And if you want to change the world, if you want to have an impact, you have to be ahead of that lag time. You can't be just receiving these things. Come down to Silicon Valley, where we are ahead of the gap. We are inventing the future. Come to Silicon Valley and help us invent the future of computing. And he said, he gave me a visual analogy that really just stuck for me. He said, you know how fun it is to surf on the front edge of a wave? Now think about the poor guy dog paddling on the tail end of the same wave. It's no fun. You go the same distance, you know, but this guy's just eating the back of the wave. This guy's surfing. Come to Apple and surf. And I think in 4 days I was an Apple employee. So he was very good at convincing, and I know at the time I really had the impression that he was kind of spinning too good of a story, you know. And on retrospect, it was an understatement. You know, he said, we're gonna affect millions of people's lives. So that was my introduction to Steve, was when he went after me to get me to come to Apple. And the other part of my relationship with him is simply that he believed in me. And I found that so empowering. For whatever reason, I don't know what Jeff Raskin said to him, but during my 12-year tenure at Apple, he kept believing in me and expecting me to do great things. And I think there's something very empowering when, you know, if you believe in your friend, they'll do great things. You believe in your children, they'll do great things. And for whatever reason, Steve believed in me and allowed me to invent and create. I'm 60 now. I was 27 when I came to Apple. So it's a long time ago. It's a different life. But I actually got to invent the pull-down menu. I can't, you know, Steve let me do that.
That tells us about Steve's persuasive abilities. It also tells us about his presentation skills, which were noteworthy. Jean-Louis, you, as a venture capitalist, you see a lot of presentations, and you saw a lot of presentations that Steve gave. Could you talk about his presentation abilities?
Yeah, I remember very well. But just a little side note, I initially refused to join the venture capital community because I thought I'd go blind looking at too many PowerPoint presentations. And in 9 years, I've seen close to 3,000 presentations, and I tell you, it's dangerous. But going back to Steve, we are now in November '83. Okay, the LISA had been announced almost a year before, and this is the sales conference in Hawaii. Okay, and so the whole sales force, I came from Europe. I was running Apple France there. The whole sales force in the U.S. and Europe is there, in a theater. The lights go down, and we see the 1984 commercial. Right? So, I'm a fan of Ridley Scott. Yeah. Okay. So when I saw that, I said, "Oh my God, this is so right," because of course IBM was Big Brother at the time. Now there are, anyways.
Now
now
Apple and Google are.
So we see this Big Brother, commercial, and then the lights come back up halfway. And from the sky, from the top of the machinery on the theater, descends a Macintosh on a cable. All right. Dr. Goebbels had nothing on Steve Jobs.
Deus Ex Machina.
So you saw the Mac come down from the sky, and halfway through the descent, the Mac booted up, and the Mac was mic'd. So you heard the bong, the initial bong, and the whole crowd was absolutely crazy. I mean, we were sort of in a trance. I remember, oh my God, the Mac coming down from the sky, and then his Steveness walks on stage and delivers a fiery speech about the fact that IBM is not going to rule the world, that Apple will go against Big Brother, and this was to me with the possible exception of the 2007 iPhone introduction, these were in my view the two best speeches I've seen from Steve.
Yeah. How about the way he communicated internally? Andy, you were on the Mac team. I remember. The Mac team, Steve created a sense of pirates. You were all pirates inside the corporation. While back with he presented the Mac against IBM, but he presented the Mac team against the rest of the company.
Well, even before Steve got involved with the Macintosh, when it was Jeff Raskin's project, it was kind of a skunk works. Very small team of unusual people that didn't have the momentum or faith of the company behind it. When Steve started, actually, he was a bit of a pirate because he sort of took over the project from Jeff. He made Jeff kind of walk the plank. And then Steve always encouraged the rebellious spirit in all of us, which I think the team naturally had, but so we resonated with Steve like that. And I think to overturn the status quo is an act of rebellion. So we were rebels trying to change the world.
Regis, did he realize he always had to be a rebel, or was there a time where he realized that he couldn't always get away with being a rebel? He needed a more dapper kind of presence.
Well, Steve was a child of the 60s. I mean, he really, and I think he remained that his whole life. And that influenced him a great deal, is to be a nonconformist, or at least to live outside the status quo and push the edges of everything. When I first met him, I sent, and I know there's different stories about Steve in different ways, but I referred him to Don Valentine, who was my boss at National Semiconductor, because Don had started Sequoia Capital, And I sent him up there, and he called me back and said, "Why did you send me these renegades from the human race?" Steve had a long, stringy beard here down his back. He had cutoffs. He at least had shoes on.
Sandals.
Wozniak was not that bad, but quite frankly, that wasn't necessarily unusual because there were some pretty strange characters in the semiconductor business that. Before the Macintosh introduction, I took him to San Francisco to buy his first suit, I had been buying my clothes at Wilkes-Bashford, which was kind of the in place, I guess, at that time to buy Italian-made suits, and so we went up there, and I think we spent the entire day matching colors. He had to have the right tie and the right suit and the right pants and the right socks and the right shoes and everything else. So it took, but we actually went back there on a number of times when there were conferences in San Francisco. As he'd say, "Let's walk over and take a look." So there was a period in his life before the black shirt and the Chinese uniform that he did really enjoy dressing up, and he was a very handsome young man.
Pixar was another amazing story, another amazing part of Steve's success. And I recall when I was reporting on technology that Pixar was at one point going to be a supercomputer company. It was going to do medical imaging, and Steve at one point spent a lot of his money. I don't know whether he spent his last dime on Pixar, but maybe, Deborah, you could fill us in a little bit on how Pixar developed and how that came about as out of Steve.
Well, I think as the legend goes, and I'm pretty sure this is the right story, Regis can correct me if I'm wrong, he bought it in 1985 from George Lucas, who had it and kind of never did much with it, and he bought it for $10 million. So I don't think it was his last dime by any means. But that was the year that he got ousted at Apple also. So there were a lot of things going on in his life in 1985. And there were all kinds of ideas about what to do with it. And Regis, you were there more, certainly I wasn't there at the time, but the things that came out of it that began to be the seed that the Pixar Animation Studios would develop from were the commercials and the short subject films that the company had done. I don't know if any of you have seen, I hope a lot of you have seen Luxo Jr. and Red's Dream and some of those just fantastic short animated films, many of which won Academy Awards. But as far as the supercomputer ideas, I don't know. I'm sure there were some really crazy things going on there. You thought Apple people were crazy. You should have seen the early Pixar guys. They literally went on skateboards from cubicle to cubicle, and you had traffic lights at intersections, and it was pretty wild. And everybody brought all their toys from home, and probably from neighboring children, I suspect, lost a lot of toys during that time. It was a Toys R Us for sure in that place. But Steve saw something really special in the people who were there. Again, the people who were very special. Ed Catmull and John Lasseter and so many others. And he decided he could use the talents that they had been using to make these short films and/or commercials, which were not profitable, really pretty much at all, and make a full-length feature film, which again is like saying you need to program the Macintosh in 3 weeks. It was one of those things that people just said, well, it just can't be done, we can't do it. And he said, yes, you can, and you will, and they did.
Just one thing on that was that whenever Steve acquired Pixar, Ed Catmull called me and invited me up to have lunch, and I thought, new client, So I drove up and we had lunch, and I forget, there was a few other people there, and the question he posed was, how do I keep Steve out of the company?
How do I what?
His reputation preceded him.
The Apple II got Apple a good deal of success, but it clearly, what we all know Apple for now is what happened after the Apple II. And Larry Tesler, I believe you took Steve on a tour of Xerox PARC and showed him some technology that became important. I wonder if you could tell us about that tour.
Well, it wasn't a tour of the physical facility, it was a tour of the software. It was part of that demonstration. Xerox was facing a lot of competition from Asian companies in copiers when their patents expired. And one thing they found was that they had a very high manufacturing cost, and they were really having trouble competing with these new forces in the market. At the same time, they had Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, developing very exciting technologies, including the Ethernet graphical user interface with Windows and improved mice from what existed before. And they started worrying that they would not be able to manufacture those cheaply enough when they moved into that market. So they looked around and saw that Apple was cranking out Apple IIs for really cheap and selling lots of them, and they thought, well, we should partner with a company like Apple, and they'll make our machines for us, something like that. They had some kind of idea of that type. And so some business development people came out from the East Coast to PARC and Apple, and when they got to Apple, they made a deal where, in exchange for various business arrangements, distribution and future discussions of manufacturing and so on, Apple would sell them stock, which was a very appealing thing because it was clear Apple was going to have a very successful IPO. So it was either 1 million shares or $1 million worth of stock that they got. And in exchange, though, Steve Jobs required that they get information, a disclosure about everything cool going on at Xerox PARC.
Good bargain.
And nobody checked with the PARC people first, but the business development people signed the deal. And so there were a number of visits. I was involved in a couple of them. One was executives visiting and meeting with some of us, trying to just get information out of us or an agenda for how to get the information out of us. And that was a little bit of a tense meeting. But I remember at one point, Steve was pacing the room, trying not to be in charge of the meeting because he was not the CEO of the company. Mike Scott was. And at one point, he just said, stop. Let's stop this discussion. We need to tell them about the Lisa. And all the Apple people kind of froze. Come on, we need to tell them about the Lisa. This conversation's going to go nowhere. So we all perked up, because it was about us disclosing to them, not them disclosing to us. But finally, they threw up their hands and said, okay, tell them about the Lisa. So somebody told us a little bit about the Lisa, which at that time did not have a graphical user interface. But it was powerful enough to do the kinds of things that they thought we were doing. And the next thing I remember was another meeting where apparently there'd been a demo in between, but they weren't satisfied with the demo. They knew there was a lot more than what we were showing them. There were a lot of people at PARC that didn't want to show them everything. And in fact, we all felt like we didn't want to show them everything, but I was one of those who felt we should show them more. But there were people that wanted to hold back everything we could. So they arranged a new set of demos where more people came. Bill was there, John Couch, Mike Scott, and obviously Steve. Jeff Raskin was there, a couple other people. And the room was pretty full, and there were about 2 or 3 of us from PARC in the room at a time, one person sitting at a computer giving a demonstration, and the other people kind of waiting their turn or observing. So during that demo, Steve again got very excited. He was pacing around the room and occasionally looking at the screen. He was mostly just looking and then reacting and taking it all in and trying to process it. And at one point, he said, "You're still not showing us everything." And the meeting paused, and there were some phone calls, and, "Okay, we're going to show you more." So I gave my demo, and Dan Ingalls gave a demo of Smalltalk, and they started asking us a lot of questions. Bill and Bruce Daniels was there too from MIT. He joined Apple. The technical people were all asking us questions, and we were answering the questions. And frankly, I was amazed. I had looked into Apple earlier, a couple of years before, because someone tried to get me to work there. And I found these people that were homebrew computer club kind of hackers. Suddenly, there were all these computer scientists in the room, and they were asking really good questions. So I got a completely different view about what Apple was like from that meeting. But Jobs was there going, what is going on here? You're sitting on a gold mine. Why aren't you doing something with this technology? You could change the world. And his buddies who were trying to, arrange a negotiation of some kind were trying to quiet him down. Don't be so excited. But it was really clear to him that we were never really going to do anything with this. By that I mean, the kinds of revolutionary things that he was envisioning. The irony was, when they left, we'd still shown them only like 1% of what Park was doing. But it was enough that they got really excited and decided they were going to retarget the Lisa to be something like what they had seen in terms of graphical user interface. They fell in love with the mouse, and that changed everything. And 7 months after that, I was working at Apple.
Thank you for coming.
So what was his legacy, if we can kind of open it up a little bit? Probably for a lot of people here and everywhere, his legacy was, well, I remember listening to rock music and wanting to be a rock star as a kid, or watching my favorite Yankee ball players and wanting to be a baseball star. I think Steve made people who were not in the computer industry feel a part of something in a way that's, I don't know whether anyone else did that. And so he managed to bring us all together or spread that feeling or that sense of excitement. Other thoughts on legacy?
I think Steve's main legacy was approaching technology as an artist, bringing artistic values. Microsoft is a company completely driven by financial values. I work at Google, and it's mainly technical values. Steve and Apple infused Apple with artistic values, with passion, with we were like on a mission from God. It was the most important thing ever. And that kind of passion just shines through the products and makes people fall in love with it. Starting with the original team and then spreading out from there.
Very well said.
I think we should pass the hat in the room, since we have people, very wealthy people in the audience, and we should pass the hat and make a collection to erect 9 statues, for Steve's achievements. When you look at it, one, of course, is the Apple II. Okay, then you have the Mac, right? Then you have Pixar, all right? Yeah. If all you do in life is Pixar, you're a captain of industry. Okay. Then there is what I call Apple 2.0, when Apple was floundering and Steve came back with the next people and make a big difference. Sure. Did I turn the mic?
No.
The mic?
Battery ran out.
No.
The battery ran out.
Just taking some.
Stop
Okay.
working.
You're talking too much, Jean-Louise.
Yes. Moi.
Much better.
So there's Apple 2.0, which is giving a new life to Apple. Then there is the iPod iTunes, which I thought was a stupid idea because everybody did MP3 players. This was a commodity business. Okay. Then another statue for the Apple stores, which are a marvel before the Lord. I love retail. But today you can go with your iPhone into an Apple store. There's an application, and if you want to buy a cable, you just check and pay with your iTunes account, and you walk out talk about frictionless commerce, and the sense of aesthetics that you have in the Apple stores. They give you two messages, the Apple stores. One, the way they are present, it says about Apple, this is what we think of ourselves. Okay? And then you go into the Apple store, and the experience you have says, this is what we think, we, Apple, think of our relationship with you, the customer. But I'm not done yet. We have the iPhone. Okay, another statue for the iPhone. Another statue for the iPad, right? You know, the industry, and Larry knows this very well, the industry tries to do a tablet for 30 years. You know, Microsoft, God bless their heart. You know, Bill Gates, if you read the book, you know, the Walt Isaacson's book, Gates says, oh, the tablets, you know, I'll be dead if tablets don't have a stylus. Not so fast, Bill. We still need you. And so that's the next to last statue. And of course, the last statue is for Apple itself. Because the first time I met Steve 30 plus years ago, Steve was a hippie sitting cross-legged on a boardroom, on a boardroom credenza, picking his toes. Okay? I mean, seriously. I came from Europe. This was my initiation trip to Cupertino. I wore a pinstripe three-piece suit because I used to work at Exxon Office System, you know. So I was thrilled because Apple was publishing a magazine. So the sense of the artistic sense I picked up immediately. So I was thrilled. So this was the hippie. Didn't wash too often, you know. Didn't cut his hair too often. And 30 years later, this is the guy, or this was the guy, who ran arguably the best run high-tech company in their entire world. So that's the last statue I think we should collect money and you know, have for Steve.
Did he have anything to do with the movies themselves at Pixar?
Oh, you know, that's an interesting point. I think a lot like at Apple, he wasn't the one doing the engineering necessarily, and he wasn't the one actually building the cases and designing everything, although he had a lot to do with it. Same thing at Pixar. He, as Regis said, he was, everyone had an idea that they needed to keep him away, but he really learned very quickly, I think, to let those very talented people do what they were so very good at doing. Now, he had a lot of input. He spent a lot of time there. I drove with him many days from Palo Alto up to Richmond at the time, and then Emeryville. Then he got a helicopter so he could get there even quicker, and you know, he was, and he drove. I guess you all have driven with him. I mean, it's a wonder he lived as long as he did. I mean, he drove these big boat Mercedes, you know, very tank-type cars, and he would drive us to Pixar, and that's a good 2 hours. We'd get there in an hour and 10 minutes, you know, just because he drove this way. But he was very involved in the things that he needed to be involved in. He did a lot of the business side of things. And again, you don't think of him as being a great businessman, but he was. And certainly the role he played in getting Disney to help to change the economics after that first, after Toy Story was such a big success, he went back to Disney and re-engineered the economics of how Pixar got paid. Later, we got half of everything, every toothbrush that was sold that had Toy Story on it, every sweatshirt, every pajama top, everything, every DVD certainly was 50% went to Pixar. So he added a lot in that respect, and just his the aura of Steve, I think, obviously helped as it did with everything he touched.
What was it like? How did he bring about collaboration? He clearly was always strong-willed, had his own opinion, but he also needed to not just get you to do something, but you need to succeed as a team. So can someone talk about?
Well, Steve cared about every single detail that came into his awareness, and he wasn't shy about going right to the person who's doing whatever he was concerned with at the moment. And looking at what they're doing, and usually it wasn't good enough. So he'd make them do it as better than they possibly could. But what strikes me is just how broad his interests were, just in every aspect of the product, from the business to as Jean-Louise said, to the retail, the software, the hardware, the screws that keep things together. It's no detail was too small to matter. And there was no management structure, he defied it. He was kind of a nightmare for the middle managers, because he'd go right to the people doing the work all the time.
And the advertising, too, I guess.
Yeah. And he did the best advertising ever done, I think. The Think Different commercial is the one that I think it most reflects his legacy. And I know he called me up like 15 minutes before it was going to air. I don't know how many people he must have called up and said, you got to turn on the TV for this. And then about 10 minutes afterwards, he calls again. What do you think? What do you think? And it was a parade of his heroes and his values. Actually, he told me that the main reason they did Think Different was because Apple had forgotten who it was. And the main audience for that commercial were the Apple employees. He had to remind them why Apple existed.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And Richard Dreyfuss, I think, narrated the commercials, but there were...
There's a version now. There are two versions now. There's one version narrated by Steve, and then go to Adweek website. There's a version of that commercial where the last picture is Steve as a young male.
Both Steves.
Yeah.
Very
nice.
If I could just make a comment about his legacy, because I think that we may be too close to really sort of articulate his legacy from what history will look back and see. But many of us have mentioned the fact that when we first encountered Steve, he talked about wanting to change the world. That kept coming up in many, many ways. And he initially, at least when I started talking to him, talked about wanting to have computers that could go into schools and go and essentially become an educational tool. That was one of his driving forces. But certainly he knew that those products were much more complex than, too complex actually for the masses of people to change the world. You had to build the volumes. So to make the technology transparent, to allow it to do its work, but not have it encumbered, or the person using it encumbered by the technology, I think that started very, very early. Steve had the ability, from thinking about Apple as a company, to build his own reference model. And he wasn't a technologist. I mean, he wasn't an engineer. He wasn't trained as an engineer. I think all you probably could attest to that better than I could. But you had to show him something, and then he would build his reference model. And he would drive, he would lift heaven and earth to get there, to build that reference model that he had in his mind. And it had to do with the company. He called me one time after he had gone back to Apple and said that, doesn't anybody want to build a company anymore? And that's one of the reasons why he admired Hewlett-Packard. He didn't admire them for much, but for the fact that they had been around 60 years. And he came to appreciate what they had built. And some of you have read this, I think, that when he left Apple, he was so embarrassed by having left the company and abandoned it, he felt, that he called Bob Noyce and Dave Packard and apologized for his failure. He was embarrassed by it because his reference model wasn't there. Now, that reference model kept changing because his experiences kept changing over time. And so the Apple that we kind of now come and say, well, this is one of the greatest entrepreneurs, really, all of those early years were part of his education. And I think the real fruits of his life came in the last 10 years. And then, of course, it's like an a narrative that's been played out before the world over the last 30 years of Steve Jobs' life. And then it, of course, ending in a tragedy, that gives it sort of a exclamation point on a story that I think will be told and retold in many different versions from different people in different ways. But clearly, Steve is going to be considered, I think, one of the greatest American entrepreneurs and innovators that we have seen.
Larry?
I think nobody's really talked about his management ability or lack thereof. So I'll start that. That's all right. Back in the first period of Apple, the first 5 years I was there, 80 to 85, before he left, he did not have a reputation as a really good manager, based on most of the criteria that people tend to apply. When I think back, he got things done not with carrots and sticks, but with charisma and stares.
Yeah.
He would just stare at you until you gave in. And I'm sure that's how he negotiated all the great prices that we got on components and everything else, too. But something changed during his time, I think, because of Pixar Next and the greater difficulty he had in giving them a good economic model. He learned to be a good manager. By the time he came back to Apple, I don't think he dropped the charisma and staring, I suspect, but he added on to that a real appreciation for process and money management. I had the good fortune of being at a management talk he gave to Yahoo when I was a VP there in 1998, I think it was. He was a featured speaker at a management meeting. And he talked about how Apple manages by managing focus. Now, that was, as you might guess, a bit of a problem for Yahoo. And we really knew that was a problem, and we wanted to learn how to manage focus, and and how to just be focused instead of having 80 or 100 businesses. How to get that down to a manageable number. And Steve knew that was our issue, and so he talked about that. And it was a brilliant talk. I'm not going to try to reproduce it. But he disclosed some things about how the executive staff there managed the business, and it was definitely a step up from the way it was when I was at Apple, and definitely several steps up from the way he managed when he was at Apple the first time. So I'd say he grew as a manager in a huge amount, and that accounts for Apple 2.0 being so successful.
Okay. We could open up for some questions if people would like to ask anyone, since there are a lot of people here who were close to Steve or close to Apple, and Chris Espinosa certainly was close to Steve and Apple.
Hi, Paul. I want to thank you immensely for stepping in and running this panel so awesomely well, and everybody in the panel for attending. I'm here in the role as a private citizen, and I am not making any public comments. I'm just asking a question based on publicly available information. But from what I've read about Steve, he was an intensely creative, dynamic, pioneering, inspirational person. And at times he could be a romantic and almost naive in his innocence and purity of heart. And then also there was the Steve who was, disregarding and manipulative and at times outright cruel. And I have still never reconciled whether all of those were Steve or whether any or all of those were kind of an act or something he just put on because it was assumed of him. I saw all three sides, and I'm still never going to figure out the innovator, the tyrant, the lover, which was the true Steve, or all three?
What was your question?
Well, I think the thing that's in common between all three of those is the passion and intensity. He was just extremely passionate and intense man, and he brought that to everything he did.
I think my experience with Steve maybe is a little different because I didn't work directly for him, though I was on Apple's executive staff. I was the only outside member for up through 85. And probably a year or two after that. But my conversations with Steve from home and from meeting, he would come over our place and visit, but he liked the idea of sitting at the kitchen table with the family at dinner. He, in fact, when he would call me, even as much as, you know, in the last, maybe a year ago, year and a half, less than a year ago, he would spend more time talking to my wife than he would to me. And they would talk about the kids and the family and so forth and so on. And I think he had this longing for belonging. And I think he kept that 60s notion of being a romantic for how he envisioned the world. He once asked me if I forget what period of time it was, but the U.S. was in a fairly complex political situation, much like we are today. And he said, "Do you think I could become president of the United States without belonging to a political party?" In other words, he said, "I can fix these problems." You know, and he sort of idealized himself as being going in and fixing things and making it different. And so I always thought he was a romantic. I think that's absolutely the right way. That was the Think Different campaign. That was right out of the 60s. And I think that then going into the business world, I think he had a hard time actually dealing or confronting people when he found something that didn't coincide with his vision. So therefore he would lash out at them, and that would sort of set up a wall where he could then become what he thought was more objective. But in effect, he always was apologetic afterwards, and I think he felt bad that he had done that. So I think Steve was really deeply human, very deeply human. And I was going to read a few emails, but I don't think I can in the last year about him.
Next question. Hang on one second.
They'll bring you a mic.
Larry just briefly mentioned Next in the context of his comments, and I'm wondering, is Next just a footnote, or did it play a role in the arc of the story of Steve?
Got Steve back to Apple.
Well, I think it played quite an important role because when Apple bought Next had almost given up on Next Step, actually, and was focusing on web objects. And Next Step was the basis that gave the Mac a new life, bringing Avi Tevanian, Bertrand Serlet, and a bunch of very competent engineers to redo the foundation of the Macintosh operating system, which now became OS X, and they have a real modern operating system based on a Unix core and all the libraries and the frameworks that we know. So Next was very important, including, in my opinion, in the fact that Steve realized that having good technology is not good enough, because Next Step was very good technology. But I wasn't good enough to get a foothold in the marketplace. And it is by reacquiring Apple, if I can. I know Apple acquired Next, but in fact, Steve took over, and we know what happened. And I think this is by reacquiring Apple that Next Step the kind of fruits that justify the labor that went into it. This was a very nice technology, but that had trouble finding its footing.
I can't help but want to ask you, because Apple almost bought your company instead of Next. How do you feel about that?
Thank God.
Let's don't go there.
Thank God that didn't happen. You know, because I hated. Now I have to say it, I hated the Apple's management. I mean, seriously, the discussions.
So did Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
Got rid of them.
Yeah.
There's some stories you don't want to tell.
I couldn't picture myself. You know, in there. So of course, when we lost the deal, it stung, as it should. But you know, then we went public and we had our time in the sun, so to speak. I even got to sue Microsoft, so I could put fresh wheels on my wheelchairs, fresh tires on my wheelchair. So, but yes, I think you know, thank God they didn't buy me, because the life would be a different place.
The other thing that I think was that I was at Kleiner Perkins also at the time. I was doing my job and also general partner there when we were considering investing in Next. And I said that it would be a very elegant machine, extremely expensive, and late. And it was, again, I think that was a lesson to Steve. I think it was part of his education, in that you can't use technology that's so ahead of its time that you are essentially always catching up, so that you know, most technology that comes out today is available. The most remarkable thing to me at Apple is that Apple made everything back in the Mac days and in the Apple II days. But if you look at the iPhone or the iPad, that's all sourced. That's all, you know, there's a vast logistics systems from sourcing to distribution that has been put in 10 years. I mean, that is an enormous task. And when you start thinking about the products that were coming out and the vast, you know, logistics infrastructure that's been put in, thanks to Tim Cook in, I think, a lot of ways, plus the retail stores, that is a revolution in itself that we don't mention outside of the products. They deliver stuff, and they deliver it on time and to your order, which is an amazing feat, I think, in 10 years.
Other questions?
Do any of you feel the magic is gone, or a lot of the magic is gone now that Steve's gone? And you know, you think of Johnny Ive and you think of Tim Cook, and they can carry on a lot of what he was trying to do, but the guy's gone. And what's left down the road 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and to the magic?
Well, there are a couple of flaming assholes at Apple that can you know, carry forward. I can give names if you like, but
Can you replace his battery?
I just have to say, one of the people I reported to for several years at Apple was Jean-Louise, and being a member of his staff is a unique, singular actual experience. You're just getting a small taste because of all the cameras and microphones.
You know, I think that you know, Silicon Valley is so filled with entrepreneurial companies. You know, the top 15 companies, well, you know, except for Hewlett-Packard, well, and Hewlett-Packard included, where they had changed, you know, or entrepreneurial companies, and they're all going to see this kind of a transition. And Steve will not be replaced. I mean, there's just, I think he was unique among all of his peers. But again, having had a long experience with Intel as well, we thought the same thing of Noyce and Moore and Grove. They were, you know, pretty dynamic people who changed the world in their own right. And Noyce was certainly the only other visionary I ever met or knew, aside from Steve, and they became fairly close friends. But yet they transitioned, and I think that we may not, we will miss Steve, but the world does continue to move on, and I think we won't know probably until 5 or 10 years as to what Apple will do. But I think in the next 5 years, certainly, his influence is the culture of innovation, the driving force, the types of the way in which they approach innovation at Apple is going to sustain itself. It is a much more bottoms-up company than one imagines. If you think of the difference between them and Microsoft, where once a year Bill Gates used to go away and write a long letter to his employees telling them what they were going to do for the next year, which was just the opposite, I think, at Apple, where they did reach out. And I think if they take advantage of those many sensors and voices that they have within Apple, there's enormous amount of creativity within Apple, tremendous amount. And Steve had the ability to recognize it and push it, but I think that creativity still exists.
Just to speak up for Pixar, if I can.
I think I've got the next question. Josh Allman here. I spent a couple of decades coaching people to become innovators. And one of the things that I have not heard, and I'm going to see if I can get your opinion about it, is he had a quality that kind of superseded almost everything else. And nobody's mentioned it yet. I find that really surprising. He was incredible at that. I think that was the driving secret. And by the way, everybody here has got that. And you can expand and work on it. And that's something called imagination. He could think of anything. And he continuously did that. And he enlarged that spirit. It was, to me, it's remarkable to see someone without training, so to speak. I mean, it was just a gift that he got from above, I guess it was. So my question to you is, in what respect has did that imagination impinge on you, and how did it express itself? What did you get out of it? Did it fire anyone else up, and how did you feel about it? Thanks.
Well, that's the difference between mystery and secrets. The secret is a combination lock. So you work hard, you bribe people, you read manuals, something, you'll get a satisfying click at the end. A mystery is a mystery. Who put God here and why her? That sort of mystery. And some of the creativity and the imagination, there's no secret there. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. You can just contemplate it. It's a mystery. And how do you get people like Steve Jobs to have the kind of imagination that he has? It's a mystery. There's no way to reproduce it. And I think every time, if you attempt to sort of mimic that sort of thing, you'll fall real hard. I think it's got to be something else and someone else to come up with the next set of really interesting idea. This said, Steve was more of an editor than a writer. Steve recognized things and edited the material that he saw in the company, as opposed to come up with ideas, all by himself, I think.
He came up with plenty of ideas and plenty of dumb ideas, but he was relentless at just following his heart, following his passion and intuition, and trying to do the greatest thing possible, again and again and again.
He wasn't interested in doing something good. He wanted to do something the best that could be done. Excellence is all that mattered. It was like, this is art, this isn't business. And I never heard him talk about how we can make money. He's talking about how can we make the world a better place? How can we make computers safe for people that have emotions? How can we make it so that people are delighted? And it was really a drive. He really taught me to treat engineering as an art form. And it's not a matter of, you know, will it do? That wasn't it at all. It's, is there any way we can make this any better? Is there any way we could make this so that people just loved it and delighted? And it took, I think, a lot of perspiration. And I think where Steve was really good at was the way he would motivate. Sometimes he wouldn't understand maybe the technology that was being used, some programming method or something. But he was really a good judge at people. So he would challenge you and look at your kickback. And he could see, he'd tell immediately if you were not sure about yourself, about what you'd done. He'd say that this was terrible, and you'd defend it and say, well, this is the best way it can be done because of this and this and this. And sure enough, in the process of explaining it, you'd have an inspiration about a simpler, cleaner, better way to do it that would do all of it, and it'd be a lot easier to explain to somebody. And in that process, even without him being able to write the code, he could inspire a programmer to write better code. And so I like what you said about his being an editor. He was an editor, but he used his sense of, his judgment of people and their emotions to know which way to go on the editing. You know, he'd know when you were really sure about yourself or when you were kind of, you know, defensive, and you know, then he'd chase you right into that corner, and he'd make you make it better. And I thought he was really good because he was very persistent, and he demanded excellence. And there was no room for something that was good. It had to be excellent, and that's what art is.
I think to the previous two questions, Steve and Apple, in a way, have continued to fertilize innovation at other companies through the process that Apple already had in place before the visit to Xerox PARC. But through the fact that some of these folks have gone on to other companies and brought the innovation and the style and the emphasis on art and design throughout the Valley and throughout other companies. Any more questions?
Yes. So, JJ, Mercedes-Benz. So, our motto is the best or nothing, I guess. That's why he liked our cars so much.
Yeah.
The question I have, a request actually to all of you. Could you share your best and your worst experience with Steve?
Sure. No.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the right answer.
But, so you want to rephrase that? The worst experience that we had probably really wouldn't be appropriate here. I'm sure that's true for almost anyone here, but other memories that we have, though, I'm sure there are a lot of them. Because we've only been able to touch on some of the things we recall.
Well, I can give one of many, probably, that was the best and the worst at the same time. So, and that was during the early days of the Lisa project, or at least my connection with the Lisa project. Every few weeks, I'd get a phone call at home where Steve wanted to discuss something. The typical time was about 2 a.m. And so, first of all, I was pretty flattered that Steve Jobs was calling me at home. On the other hand, I was pretty pissed off that anybody was calling me at 2 a.m. to have a serious conversation. So that would be both.
I think, okay, mine was actually walking one time from down in the Village in New York and walking back to the St. Regis Hotel where we stayed because he liked the Maxwell Parrish murals that were on the walls there, and just talking about life in general. And it was just a long walk on a cold night, and it was a great thing. People don't believe this, but I never once had those asshole experiences with Steve. Never once. Now, Andy did, who worked for me, and I guess she was the buffer, but I never had that. Never in my years of knowing him did we ever have a rough time.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? Other questions?
Back to
Okay.
Up front.
Jean-Louise.
Oh.
As an Apple alumni from 81 to 92, there was that sort of dark period from 85 to 90 where you were the Steve Jobs of Apple.
Dark period?
What?
He was gone. There was no Steve, there was Jean-Louise. And I'll never forget when you assembled the Mac Portable at the sales conference of, I think it was 87 or something like that. So you picked up a few things along the way. What did you learn from Steve that enabled you to carry that flame for that next 5 years?
Well, I think you know, one of the reasons I got fired from Apple is because I wanted to apply some of that, which was to have the ability to be wrong for a period of time until you're right. And I got so frustrated that, you know, for instance, the Mac Portable was a very frustrating experience because I wanted to outsource the portable Mac to Sony because I believed that a Japanese company would be a much better collaborator, partner, to do something, you know, small and light and have the sense of the very Japanese, at least to me, very Japanese sense of accomplished, you know, detail. And that, for a number of political reasons, I couldn't do. So yes, one of the things I've appreciated with Steve was, you know, his ability to go against the common wisdom and stay with it until you're right. Today, we saw what happened with Flash.
He was right.
Question? Who has a mic?
Hello. So just from listening to this conversation, my understanding is that you guys all worked with Steve Jobs because there's something different or that is successful about you. And I was wondering what you guys think it is that set you apart, like what the common denominator between all of you is that got you where you are.
I had trouble catching the question.
There's a lot of echo. It's hard for us to
I'm sorry.
hear you.
What is the common denominator that got you all working with Steve? What do you all have in common that made you successful, I guess, and where you are?
I would say it's a love for what you were doing, a love for computing was the single most common thing. We really cared about the same things he did.
I think there was also an evangelical desire to make the world a better place. I mean, we were not just doing a job. We were trying to teach and show and make something better. Make a dent in the world is what Steve said to each of us that got us to come. Come to Apple and affect the future. Make a dent, and he didn't mean like a dent like make a hole in it. Make an impact, a good impact. Make the world a better place. And I think all of us on the team really were thinking about how can we make the world a better place? And that's a common theme that we all have.
Let me let Steve answer that. This is an email. I had sent him something and he came back and he said, Regis, we were both lucky. We both stumbled into something we loved doing very young in life and then have been doing it for a long, long time. As I look around me, I see that's pretty rare.
Amen.
Deb,
Oh, we also all have a high threshold for pain.
I'm Carol Espinosa. I actually worked for you, Jean-Louise, sometime in the 80s. And I remember your Mercedes because you weren't as tidy as Steve about cleaning out the brake dust in the wheels.
I can't hear that.
I'm sorry. You had Mercedes as well, as I remember, and Steve was a perfectionist about his, but you left your wheels dirty with brake dust, which I always noticed.
I didn't get it.
All right. My question is actually about the legacy of Next. You've discussed the importance of Next in helping Steve develop into the person who could do 2.0. and also the importance of the Next software as the basis for OS X. I wonder if any of you has thoughts on the importance of Next and Next Step for enabling Tim Berners-Lee to create the internet, the World Wide Web.
Yeah, I just come back from CERN, you know, where in fact, where Tim Berners-Lee was and for some reason we were a small group of people who had a good guide, and so someone noticed my name on the roster, and they took me to see an old Next machine, that they had in the lab, and they say, until recently it was still working, and this is where the web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. CERN is the near Geneva, where now they have the largest man-made structure in the world, which is the large Hadron super collider, 27 kilometers round. And yes, the Next contributed to the invention of the web as we know it, not the internet, but the web as we know it, with when Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee now, was a researcher there.
Who has a microphone?
I first want to say I'm a very proud Apple user. I have the iPhone as well as the computer itself. I want to know if Steve came up with the Apple being 3/4 setting. That came from my 9-year-old. Of the Apple, the emblem, instead of it being a full apple, it's a bitten apple.
Oh, the logo? The
and
Apple
Jean-Louis.
logo, the origins of the Apple logo.
Yeah. No, that was designed by a fellow that worked for me, Rob Janoff. But the byte was really just a graphic element. People have all kinds of connotations for it, but it was simply to be able to tuck Apple Computer, because the whole name was in there then, and so it just didn't look right hanging out there, so he took the byte out of it today. Now, the thing that is the thing that is interesting about that is that the colors, though, were actually done by a fellow that no one acknowledges. His name was Tom Kamafuji. Tom was an illustrator who had done a lot of he did the 7-Up commercials and other things with those colorful banners in the 60s. So he was a kind of a 60s, he did these very beautiful graphics, multicolor graphics, and actually I had him do some ads in 1965 for me using those same 7 colors. I let him use some space in my office. He was living in San Francisco. He moved down here. And he stripped in those colors into that and made the difference. Steve didn't want to buy it. And I remember coming over and we talked over my kitchen table about this. Because he didn't think you could hold the colors in register when you printed them on metal. And so we had to go out and actually do that and get some printed on metal so that we could convince him that it would work, and it did.
Jean-Louis, do you mind referring to your description in your book?
Oh, yeah, about the logo?
About the logo, yes,
yeah,
I love it.
I thought, I know you're right about the byte in the Apple, but I'm French. So,
really?
I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm French. Really. Although I've been Californicated after 26 years. So the French have this sort of way of psychologizing, things. So the way I saw it was a symbol of desire, the apple, bitten to it, another manifestation of desire, with crossed by the colors of the rainbow, which was hope, in the wrong order, which is anarchy. So to me, the Apple logo, and thank you for reminding me, Larry, the Apple logo was a great summary of what Apple was at the time.
Thank you. I'm enjoying your stories immensely. I had a quick story of my own and a question. At 16, I was a computer room monitor in high school, and they replaced the TRS-80s with Apple IIe's, and I was learning to program BASIC on these, and I was programming Space Invaders, and I was going, just blipping across the screen very slowly. So to speed it up, I learned 6502 assembly language, because that was the CPU in there, and I could do bit blitz and make it scroll smoothly across the screen. And somehow my math teacher hooked me up with a couple of physicists who ran a business building lab instruments, and they happened to use the 6502. And so at 17, I was doing embedded systems programming for this company. And that really set the course of my whole life, that event. And so to Steve and to all of you for that influence, to me personally and to my generation, I appreciate it greatly. So I have this attachment to the 6502, and also one of the things that's been amazing to me about Apple was the switch over to Intel. And I was wondering if any of you can talk about Steve's influence on that, because having a company of that size turn on a dime and so successfully release a line of products with Intel, how did that happen? It's just amazing to me still.
None of us were.
Well, yeah, it wasn't when any of us were around, but I would say they had done that trick before. It was the second time, because the Mac was made out of the 68,000, but then in the mid-90s they switched to the PowerPC, entirely different processor architecture, but still managed to run, thanks to a guy named Gary Davidian, who did just
emulator,
just a superb 68,000 emulator. They could run the same code. So I think partially that might have given them the confidence. If we've done it before, we can do it again.
Well, when the next step ran on Intel, so when the next people took over engineering at Apple, in effect, I'm simplifying, they had this knowledge about all the compilers. So from the very beginning, when Steve came back to run Apple 2.0, the whole system there was a compile switch, and it was always compiled for both Intel and PowerPC from the very.
Sure, but that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was Rosetta, being able to run the old
the
apps
on the
new processor.
Yeah.
But it was actually one of the reasons that the company decided to acquire Next. I was just slightly involved in the decision-making process, just advising. But we had actually tried a few years before to port the Mac OS to Intel. There was a very valiant team of engineers who tried to do it. But there was so much machine code still there that to make it be able to run in both was just really, really hard. And so a number of the senior engineers and I got together, and we recommended to the company that first they modernize the operating system and then try to get it to run on Intel. Either initially by developing our own in-house operating system that turned out to be one of these projects that just grew and grew and never finished. And then eventually when we realized that wasn't going to work, that we had to acquire an operating system. And the two obviously we were looking at was BOS and Next. And one of the pluses was that once we had that, we could have the option of making an Intel machines.
We're going to start a company, a Jobs Legacy Incorporated, after this meeting this evening, but for now we have time for two more questions.
I just want to ask, this is almost a question for the distinguished panel as much as it for you, Paul, and this is almost like the third or the fourth time after watching Pirates of Silicon Valley, and the final scene. And I know one of the gentlemen actually talked about various facets of Steve's personality. But I think one question, and it's almost folklore that his relationship, love and hate. I don't know about how much love, but his love and hate relationship with Bill Gates, and that tipping point in history when he comes back to Apple. Why Bill Gates? Why does he go to Bill Gates and ask for money? It is humbling, of course, for such a huge personality to go to, is arch nemesis. Pardon my language here, but it almost seems that way. Can anyone shed light on whether it was a humbling experience or was it a calculative experience for him to actually go back to Bill Gates and ask to save the company?
I think he was a practical guy.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think Apple needed that foundation of that Microsoft could bring with Microsoft's ongoing development of its applications.
There was also a small matter of intellectual property. Yeah. There was an ongoing, there was a brewing big IP suit from Apple against Microsoft. And that went on and on and on. And Steve, when he came back, because this had been initiated by Michael Spindler, and Steve saw this as an opportunity to combine, to get an IP settlement from Microsoft and get some cash into Apple. This is, in my semi-informed opinion, what really took place.
No, you're right. There was a patent negotiation going on, patent cross-license, and this was part of the terms of that. It was also just important to both companies. Steve knew that, in a way, Bill Gates needed Apple to survive. First of all, when Apple was doing well, Microsoft would make about as much money on every Mac that was sold by selling Office as they made for every Windows machine that was sold. And so it was a source of revenue for them. But also, they were dealing with antitrust issues. And the worst thing would be to have no competitor. They needed a competitor. They perceived it as being a small, weak competitor, and it was at the time, but they needed that. So I think there were lots of reasons that both companies benefited from that deal, and it wasn't really a hard deal to make.
One more question?
Hi. My name is Stephen Shu, and I go to Homestead High School. So as the last question of the night, from the endeavors in Steve's garage all the way till now, especially in the Silicon Valley, competition in the technology industry has grown so much. I just wanted to know what your opinions are for what the future of the industry of technology is, especially in this area. Because now without Steve, what do you think will happen? Obviously there will be innovation, but where do you think everything will go? All right, thank you.
Pretty open-ended question. Okay.
Well, look, when the Google founders went around to raise money, a lot of venture firms, not ours, a lot of venture firms told them, go away, go away. We have Excite, we have Yahoo, so there's no need for another search engine. Well, we know what happened. And then when Google rose and rose and rose, people said, well, that's it, game over. And then what? Guess what? You have Facebook. So this is the kind of cycle that will continue, because after a while, groups of people get married. They become the incumbents. They become IBM. They become Microsoft. Hopefully, Apple won't become that, but there's always the danger. Google will become big and will become the incumbent, and they get attached to what they have. And they get derailed by some crazy guy or some two guys in a garage, literally. Still today, you have two companies starting in garages that, especially now, it's a lot less expensive. Ask a venture capitalist. It's a lot less expensive to start a company now than it was 10 years ago, because all the infrastructure is in the cloud. You don't need to buy hardware. You can rent capacity. You have open source software for the operating system, the development tools. So you have very little capital expenses needed to start a company. So I think, and now you have this huge wave of mobile. The iPhone, the tablet, Android, you name it. That creates this huge wave. Remember, 4 years ago, Apple had zero revenue in mobile. Now it's a $70 billion I mean, seriously, how does that happen? How does it happen that a company goes from zero to $70 billion in a short 4 years? So then you have the cloud, and then you have the social graph. This is, in my opinion, this is the best time to start a company that I've seen in 43 years in high tech.
Well, they've been saying that for a long time, but I actually have kept track of this over the last 50 years, and I have, in fact, I have these slides that I use that are PowerPoint that are that are quotes from magazines and newspapers talking about the last days of Silicon Valley, going back to the 1960s. Because every time there's sort of a downslope in the marketplace, people say, well, that's the end of it, and there's all these prognostications about it vanishing. And Jean-Louise is right. There is an infrastructure here, and we have our own culture of innovation that exists in the Valley. But about every 10 years, there's a new industry that rises here. It doesn't happen all the time, but about every 10 years, you'll see 3 or 4 companies that seem to dominate an industry, and you can sort of categorize them if you go back and look at them. And I mentioned that the top 15 companies, but 12 of those companies were formed in the last 15 years. And those 12 companies represent in excess of $600 billion in revenue here in the Valley, and employ about 3/4 of the employees in Silicon Valley. So they were all entrepreneurial companies 15 years ago. And so we continue to see this sort of churning and the creating of new ideas and new industries. I would say, in my own view, having come here in 1963 and watched it, it's much more competitive today. There's a lot more companies encroaching on every little bit of space that you can imagine in the marketplace. So it's much more competitive. You have to be sharper. You have to be much more aware of how to use other people's resources to gain your foothold and to grow. But it's still there.
I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Karen, I think.
On behalf of our audience, our co-hosts, thank you so much, Bill, Jean-Louise, Andy, Regis, Deb, Larry, and Paul, for delivering this remarkable, right, experience. As a very small token of our appreciation, we present an extremely well-designed and comfortable Churchill Club t-shirt.
Oh, hey. Thank you.
And we also, one more thing. In addition to thanking our generous underwriters, the Markle Foundation, Green Plum, and Splunk, Asa Mathet, the brilliant photographer, has generously donated a signed photograph of a photo that he took of Steve Jobs, and a randomly chosen winner, JJ, Mercedes-Benz. Please come and pick up your photo. And thank you so much. You have been an amazing audience. Thank you. Good night.